Good morning, and thank you for joining today's OSHA Safety Training webinar hosted by NJ Carr. Your presenter today is Scott Hubbard of Environmental Compliance Monitoring, or ECM for short. Today, Scott will be reviewing the OSHA safety training that is required of all employees who use hazardous chemicals. Hazard communication training, including the information on the newly adopted Global Harmonization Standard, will be covered, along with fire extinguisher training. Training on the new standard is required for all employees working with hazardous chemicals by December 1st of this year. Before we begin, there's a few housekeeping details. The majority of your screen will show today's presentation. On the right-hand side of your screen is your control panel with an audio tab and a questions tab. If you choose to dial into the webinar with a telephone, the dial-in number, access code, and audio ID are under the audio tab. During the presentation, all participants will be muted. If you have a question during the presentation, you can submit it to the moderator under the Questions tab, which will be constantly monitored. We will try to address as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar, but we may even hit on a few during breaks in the presentation. Now I'd like to turn things over to Scott Hubbard for today's webinar.
Good morning. Today we're going to be going over some training required by OSHA. Hopefully everybody got the handouts that were emailed as part of the registration process. With those,
if you didn't, I'm not going to interrupt Scott. If you didn't, we will give you my email address at the end of the presentation, where we can send them to you again if you didn't get them for some reason. So.
Right, and that includes an agenda on what we're going over today, as well as quizzes, which will need to be completed and faxed or emailed to me to receive credit for the training. Again, any questions that you have, feel free to type them in. Brian will read them to me, and we can go over them as we go along or at the end. There's also a couple other handouts in there, which I'll mention as we go along. Lift safety tips, and also a handout on the new global harmonization requirements that Brian had mentioned. We're going to start out with the hazard communication training. We'll be going into, when that's complete, we'll be doing fire extinguisher training. Again, both of these training sessions are administered and regulated by OSHA in New Jersey. If you have trouble sleeping at night, you can go to OSHA.gov, and the slide that you're looking at has the regulation, which I'm going to summarize today, but that's all spelled out on OSHA's website. The basis of this regulation is to inform people that use chemicals what the hazards of the chemicals that they're using, and also means to minimize those hazards and protect themselves. So this came out in the 80s. Initially in the early 80s it was for manufacturers, and then later in the 80s, in 1987, it was for anybody using chemicals. So that pretty much covers anybody. In my office, we have a laboratory. Those people are covered. And then in a dealership scenario, obviously the techs using the automotive products and even the detail people that are using soaps would need this training. One of the good things about working with dealerships, and my company, we've worked with over 400 the last 17 or 18 years, is that the chemicals used at dealership seem to be getting less hazardous as time goes on. There's a big initiative for green products now, which are less harmful to the environment, and typically those are less harmful to the people that are using them as well. So, you know, back in the 90s, with asbestos in brake linings, going away from parts washers with solvents in them that are carcinogens, to either a citrus cleaner or, say, a Cuda bath, which is almost like a dishwasher for parts. Just generally, products are getting more and more safe as we go along, which is a good thing. There's three parties relative to this regulation. This is on your quiz. There's the chemical manufacturers, the people that make the products. They're not allowed to just make up a new brake clean and put it out in the shelves to be sold. Before they do that, they have to figure out what the hazards of the chemicals are, and they need to prepare what's called the material safety data sheet. MSDS's detail a lot of the items that I'm talking about in this training, everything from effects of exposure to the chemical, firefighting measures, storage measures, all the things that we're going over are contained in those MSDSs. And employers, your dealership, have to maintain those MSDSs. So those have to be available to everybody. 6 o'clock at night, if you're working on a car and God forbid somebody is exposed, those have to be available. So they shouldn't be locked away in a file cabinet, which is one of the questions on the quiz as well. They also have to have, employers have to have training, which we're covering today, and then also have just a written hazard communication program that says that they're going to maintain those MSDSs and provide the training. This training, which we'll go over in a little bit, has been in effect since the 80s. There was a major change, which we're going over last year. The Global Harmonization Standard was signed into law, and that's going to be phased in over the next 3 years until June 2016, which is going to change all the labeling and those MSDS sheets I had mentioned previously. Types of hazards, there's chemical, physical, and biological. We're mainly focusing on the chemical hazards today, but there also are, physical hazards in a dealership, obviously, so we're going to touch on those, particularly with the lifts that you're using and some of your grinders. And then biological isn't so much for dealerships, but for example, some of our geologists that do work out in the field have to worry about things like Lyme disease and poison oak. All right, even small amounts of hazardous chemicals can be hazardous to you. Again, if you use them properly and use the personal protective equipment that's recommended, you can minimize those hazards. And because we're using chemicals at work, and I say we because I use them in my job as well, we're getting the double dose. So we're getting household chemicals if we're doing a painting job at home, and then when we go to work, we're also getting exposure to chemicals. So that's something to be aware of, and that's a question in the quiz. So household chemicals can be just as hazardous or more hazardous than some of the stuff that we're using at work. Okay, the way that to minimize these hazards, following the instructions on the MSDSs and labels, understanding the chemicals that are in your area, handling those chemicals properly, so not if we have some waste gasoline from a car, not putting it where there's a heat or ignition source. So all those things can minimize the hazards from the chemicals that are there. Okay, so there's 4 things that make chemicals hazardous. And when you look, say, you hear the term hazardous waste, these are some of the things that make a waste hazardous, just as opposed to a regular solid waste. The first one's ignitability. Gasoline, which you might have, is ignitable. Corrosivity, the sulfuric acid in your batteries is corrosive. Reactivity, which you probably won't see that much in the dealership scenario. Some chemicals are hazardous when mixed with air or water. And then toxicity. So those are the ones that are going to cause an adverse health effect for you. I always mentioned, given this training, prior to the regulations that specified this type of training, it was kind of up to the individual employer. There were some other minor Safety Act regulations, but I always mention the Alice in Wonderland movie that they just remade with Johnny Depp, where they had the Mad Hatter, and that basically came from a book in the 1920s, where, say, up in North Jersey, they were making hats, and they were using mercury, free mercury, to put it in the rims of the hats to make them stiff, like the hats you see, say, in the Godfather movie. And mercury destroys your nervous system, so basically these hatters would become crazy by using those, by making the hats. Okay, exposure limit. For the chemicals that you're going to be exposed to at work, OSHA has established permissible exposure limits. So those are the limits that you can be exposed to in air where you shouldn't expect an adverse effect to the majority of the population. So those are written into laws. They're called PELs. There's also a number that comes out every year that's not written into law with any new data called TLVs. That's where the experts look at any studies that are out there and may adjust that PEL number annually. As we're going along here, unless you're in a body shop operation, most of the chemicals that you're working with should be below the PEL if conditions are right, the ventilation is adequate. However, that doesn't mean that some people aren't more sensitive to certain chemicals than others. You can have hypersensitivity. So if you're doing a job in the dealership and you're noticing some symptoms, dizziness, headaches, whatever, that's where you want to pull out the MSDS sheet and take a look at that. And depending on what you're doing, you could modify your practices. So say there's better ventilation, have a fan nearby, or use an alternate product, whatever. So that's where you shouldn't be over the PEL, but again, you might want to be aware if you're noticing side effects when you're doing a task with chemicals. All right, so those are the 4 things that make a chemical hazardous. These are the 4 things, 4 ways a chemical can enter your body. There's dermal, which is skin or eye contact. You spill something on your skin. Inhalation, you breathe it in. Ingestion, you swallow it. Or penetration, you cut yourself, step on a nail that has a chemical on it. The 2 most common in dealership scenarios is inhalation and dermal. You're using products all day, automotive products, so there's a good chance you can get it on your skin or breathe it in. Okay, acute versus chronic symptoms. This is a question in the quiz, and the reason that this is important to understand is acute is also called short-term. It's something that you're going to notice right away. So you spill that sulfuric acid in your skin, you get a rash. You breathe something in, you get dizzy. That's an acute or short-term effect, which again is a question in your quiz. The reverse of that is chronic or long-term symptoms. So that's something that you're not going to see 5 minutes after you're exposed to chemical. That might be something you don't see for several years. I used to walk in the back of shops, and guys would be washing their hands before lunch in the starter solvent, the parts washers, which is a carcinogen, and that's not something they're going to see right away. But if doing that for 20 years, you might have long-term effects with that. So you got to be aware of following the warnings on the MSDSs and protective equipment if it's recommended to use it, because you may not see the effects right away. Okay, so current labeling requirements for OSHA. Right now, OSHA wants 2 main things on any drum or container that you have. They're pretty open on how you do that. That's all changing with those global harmonization standards by 2016. But right now, all OSHA wants is identification of what's in the container, say if it's an antifreeze, drum antifreeze, and then a description of the hazards. So say if you have a 55-gallon drum of gasoline, you could write flammable on there, you could have a sign of the picture of flames, whatever, as long as it conveys the hazards. That's all going to change with the new standards. The most common one, again, it's not required that this is the symbols that are used, but there's an NFPA triangle, which is shown here in this slide, is the most common one that you see out on the highways, the trucks driving by. That's the National Fire Protection Association. And there's 4 boxes here. There's a trick question on the quiz. Blue is health, red is flammability, yellow reactivity, and white is a special box where they might put one of these symbols on the right of the slide here, whether it's radioactive or if it's compressed gas, you might see that in that box. And if you can take one thing away from this training, I know everybody's busy with work and there's a lot of other things going on, but in these boxes there's going to be a number 0 to 4. And if you can just remember that if you see a 3 or a 4, 4 is going to be extremely hazardous, and 3 is not much better. Just to give you a point of reference, sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach, that's a 2. And anybody that's used bleach knows it's pretty pretty nasty substance. So if you see a 4 or 3, you should definitely take a step back, look at the MSDS. If you're at home and you have small kids, make sure it's stored safely. Make sure you're wearing the right protective equipment, or even use an alternate product that isn't as hazardous. So I've been in a situation where I've been at a dealership and a company came by giving free samples for wheel cleaner at a high-end dealership. I think it was a Porsche dealership. And it turned out that the stuff was very hazardous. So they decided to turn down the free samples because they didn't need their wheels that clean with something so hazardous. Okay, just some examples of storage here with, see the nice labeling, secondary containment in case of a spill. Okay, here's a couple that aren't so good. You see the drums, a couple of them are about to explode under pressure, no labeling. You can't see it, but there's holes in this stuff. This is one of our sites where somebody we had a groundwater treatment system with some new drums with some filters in it, and somebody just dropped this little gift off. It's right next to a stream. It's falling off the pallets there. And another dealership, a couple pictures, the one on the right, waste antifreeze drums without the bung in there. It's about to rain again. They're already overflowing. Okay, the Global Harmonization Standard, GHS. This is the one that I mentioned was just signed into law last year, 2012, and there's a 4-year phase-in period. So training is required for this by December 1st, so that's what we're doing this morning to meet that requirement. And if you look in your handouts that I gave, there's a one-page handout which has pictograms for the different health hazards. There's 9 of them. The top 3 are, there's health hazard, flame, and exclamation mark. Those are the pictograms that are going to be on all containers by the middle of 2016. Whereas before I mentioned that you could, if it was flammable, you could do a picture of a little devil with a pitchfork or a flame, whatever. That's all changing now. It's all going to look the same, whether it's a container from Japan or Germany or from Canada. So they changed all the labels. They also changed the material safety data sheets are now going to be called safety data sheets. And right now OSHA has a set of requirements for those MSDSs, but there's no set requirement on how you present that. So that's all changing now. So there's going to be a set 16-section format for those SDSs that they'll all have to be the same. And then also hazard classifications. That's changed now. So, for example, if it's a corrosive, I had mentioned the sulfuric acid in your battery. Before you'd have a drum and it would just say corrosive on there. Well, you may have a corrosive chemical that may be corrosive to the container. So in 5 years you're going to develop a hole in the container. Or you could have something like some of our clients up in Connecticut use hydrofluoric acid, which is, if you basically, they say, if you get on your skin, don't even try to go to the sink because it's going to go straight to the bone. It's extreme corrosive hazard. So now they've ranked those so people have a better idea when they're seeing corrosive what the level of hazard is.
And just a reminder that I know Scott mentioned a attachment. If for some reason you don't have any of them there or you didn't receive them, I just reiterate again that we will make sure that everybody gets all the attachments. We will address that at the end of the webinar.
Okay. And so the goals of this change global harmonization system is to make something that makes sense to everybody. So the whole global economy, we have several clients where they have chemicals and containers coming in from Japan, Europe. So it's trying to make it comprehensive so that everybody's familiar, no matter where the container came from, what's in it, and what the hazards are. And also I'd mentioned that OSHA allows different labeling systems, whether it's that NFPA that I've gone over before, or HMIS, which is Hazardous Management Information System. So I'm trying to reduce confusion and just make one labeling system. So, you could a company out there can have their own environmental and safety department. They can be making up their own numbers. So they're trying to make that so it's clear when you get a package in, you know how to store it and what the hazards are. All right, so before I had said that OSHA just wanted the two things, what was in the container and what the hazard was, and you could pretty much do that however you wanted. They're still requiring the product identifier in terms of what's in the container, whether it's a 55-gallon drum or above-ground tank, but now they're also asking for the manufacturer or distributor on that label as well, which are on a lot of labels already, but now it's going to be required. Okay, the next thing that's on there has to be a signal word. So there's only two words that are a signal word. It's either danger or warning. So in the example I was given before, the corrosive, the one that might just be corrosive to a drum, would be warning, and then the one I was saying that the hydrofluoric acid, if you get it on yourself, you're in bad shape. That's going to be a danger. So it kind of gives you a sense of what the level of hazard of the container is. All right, the next thing that's going to have to be on there is a hazard statement. So with the example I was telling you before with the mercury, it's going to say, you know, if you use mercury to make hats, you're going to be in pretty bad shape after a couple of years. So this example here is causes damage to kidneys through repeated exposure. So that's the hazard statement. The next thing that's going to be on under that is the precautionary statement. So it's going to tell you how to minimize that hazard. So wear gloves when using mercury, whatever, when using this chemical. And then the last thing is the handout that I had mentioned before, which again is Brian will make available to everybody if you didn't get it. There's 9 symbols. They're all going to look the same. It's going to be a white background with a red frame. So some of the manufacturers objected to that because they didn't want a color label because it's, you know, obviously more expensive, but they're all going to be uniform. And here's what it's going to say. There's going to be a black symbol, a white background, and red frame. I had mentioned that there's 9 pictograms. Only 8 of those are enforceable right now because we'll get to it, but there's actually a pictogram for environmental hazards. So OSHA's not allowed to enforce that. They're only allowed to enforce safety hazards. However, the EPA already has a lot of this information up on their website, so I can anticipate them getting the authority to enforce those environmental type labels. I'm not going to go over every label with you, but here are 2 of them, explosives and corrosive hazards. So you see the exploding bomb for the explosive hazard, and they break those up 1.1 to 1.4. And that's going to tell you the 1.1 is obviously more hazardous than the 1.4. And then corrosive, they break it in 1A to 1C. So I was telling you before with the sulfuric acid. So that's going to be, that's going to have to be on the label on this pictogram. And then here's the one I was telling you that it's an environmental. You see the dead fish with the tree without the leaves by the stream. That's going to probably be on labels. So say if you're at your dealership and you have, say, an above-ground tank in the back of your dealership and there's a stream next door, then you're obviously going to want to make sure that you have some kind of containment, secondary containment in case that tank springs a leak or somebody drives into it. Okay, so on the containers, you might have multiple pictograms on a container. I think pesticides are probably going to have at least like 4 of these pictograms because they have different hazards. They can be toxic, they can be corrosive, and they'll probably list those in terms of which is the highest hazard. And again, that signal word and hazard statement is going to help you differentiate what the level of hazard is on the container, in the container. Okay, so and then I had mentioned before the MSDS is no longer going to be called MSDS, it's going to be the SDS, but they're going to, and the information is going to be the same, but they're going to be put into a set format. That's a 16-section format that OSHA is specifying. Okay, so they also probably, for ease of use, it's not a requirement, but probably when you open that SDS, when they're talking about a particular hazard, they'll have that little pictogram right in the SDS. The goal is that somebody sees one of these pictograms and knows immediately what it is. It's a poison, it's an explosive, whatever. That's the goal of this program. Okay, so again, all the stuff that I'm talking about here in terms of types of hazards and exposure scenarios and how it gets in your body, that's all summarized on these MSDSs. So hopefully your dealership has those and those are available to you. If you're in a body shop now, a lot of times those are available on a computer, and that's fine too. OSHA allows that, and that's kind of where things are going, where as opposed to having a big yellow binder that a lot of people are familiar with, there's going to be a computer so that if you need to pull one up, you can just go right to the computer and do it that way. Again, this should be available to everybody. They're there for us. It used to be where you had to contact the manufacturers to get these MSDSs, and it would take a month to put together that binder. Now there's a lot of websites out there. You can do a Google search and bring it up. If you have something happen at home or at work, you can pull these things up pretty easily now. Some are still only available from the supplier, but most of them are available online. Okay, so here's a page from the first page from an MSDS. When they first came out with these things in the 80s and 90s, a lot of times you had to be a rocket scientist to read them. Now they're pretty user-friendly, so you open it up and it kind of tells you right there at the bottom of this slide here. You see, bold letters, harmful if swallowed or inhaled. And again, this is the bleach, the sodium hypochlorite I was telling you about before. And as you can see here at the top, the health rating is only 2 for the bleach. So you can imagine when you start getting to a 3 or 4. Health effects. So if you're experiencing effects when you deal with a specific chemical or gas, it's going to tell you right here on what that is. So you want to look at that, and again, you can modify your practices if necessary. Okay, first aid measures. There's 4 of them here for each of those pathways into your body I mentioned: inhalation, ingestion, skin contact, and eye contact. 3 of the 4 are almost always the same. Inhalation, you want to get the fresh air. If you skin contact, wash it off. The one that's different, ingestion, it may tell you to give people water. It may say not do anything. Induce vomiting. You really have to read the MSDS for that. Also, the one thing here, if somebody is exposed to a chemical, the EMTs, would help them to give them that MSDS, because doctors are going to want to know what the chemical was and the treatment methods. They don't have that saved away, and they don't remember that. So it's different for each chemical. And then there's a question on the quiz about treatment for eye contact. I know dealerships, you may either have the hard-piped eye washes, or you may have the boxes in the walls. The reason those boxes are all the same size is that OSHA mandates you have to have 15 minutes of water at 0.4 gallons per minute. So those boxes are all 6 gallons. The reason that's important is that if you do get something in your eye, or somebody that you're working with does, or your kids at home, you really want to flush that out, because the chemical is going to get behind your eye and continue to work at your nerve endings there. So you really want to stay under and give that a good flush. So for the quiz, that's flush for 15 minutes with water. Okay, personal protective equipment. Dealership scenario, the surgical gloves, safety glasses. And again, for the safety glasses, not just chemical hazards, but the grinders that you use, you should be wearing safety glasses for those. So if something happens to the grinder, you're protected. Respirators, that's a question in the quiz, used by body shop personnel. Again, this is the way, by wearing this protective equipment, that's where you're going to avoid those long-term or chronic hazards that you're not going to see right away. Especially if there is any body shop employees, it's really key that you're wearing your respirator properly and that you have a proper fit on it. So that's kind of a high point of contact for chemicals for the auto industry is the body shop personnel using those paints. So there's some real easy tests to make sure that that mask is fitting you, and that should be part of a separate training program for anybody that's using respirators. Okay, if you see a spill and if you spill like a little antifreeze, go ahead and clean it up so the guy walking next to you with a box doesn't slip on it. But if you walk into the shop in the morning and there's a couple inches of product in your service bay area and you're not sure where it's coming from, just evacuate the area. Let the experts come in. So if you can't tell the source of the spill or if it's safe, just evacuate. If you are going to go clean spill up, notify somebody in case you are injured cleaning up the spill. And if it's safe to do so, remove ignition sources. So if a drum tips over by your lift, go over to the circuit box and shut off the circuit breaker for your above ground lift. You don't want electrical sources when you have a petroleum product that's spilled. So there's actually a rule that OSHA has. The fire department's going to do the same thing. So any circuit boxes that you have to be clear for 36 inches in front of that. You may have seen like black and yellow tape on the floor so nobody puts brooms or whatever, you know, against the circuit breaker box. That's the thought there. Okay, just a couple pictures here. Not so great. Hopefully speedy dry is being phased out and you're using either rags, laundry rags, or the pig mats. A lot of times these products, they just get speedy dry, it goes down, it doesn't come back up. So I guess there's no questions yet relative to this. If you have any, feel free to type them in. Pretty much, just as I said in the beginning, there's hazards associated with the chemicals, but if they're managed properly and you do wear the protective equipment, you should be able to minimize those hazards. So.
If anybody has any questions, there is a questions tab on the side of your screen there, or you can raise your hand. That might be a little problematic because sometimes we can't hear if you're listening through your computer. The computer microphones sometimes don't work very well. But if you have any questions from now until the end of Scott's presentation, please feel free to submit them on the right-hand side of your screen.
And you can also either call me or send an email afterwards if there's any questions when you're going over the material or doing your quiz. Feel free to email me. If you came in late for this presentation, you can watch the recording later. There'll probably be a bunch of people that aren't live here that are going to watch that. Brian can tell you how to access that.
We will be, I was going to cover this at the end, but I can reference it now and cover it at the end. We are going to be, we've recorded this webinar, and we're going to post both the recording and all of the attachments. Anyone who attended, registered to attend today's webinar will get a free code to download it for free. So if you missed, as Scott said, if you missed the beginning of this, you can listen to the whole thing. I'm also going to give you my email address at the end here, so if you didn't get the attachments, I can send them to you later this afternoon once we wrap up. But we'll cover that at the very end. We did get a question here. The question is, do you still have to report the MSDS to the state of New Jersey?
The MSDSs only have to be kept on site. Nothing has to be submitted to the state of New Jersey. However, there's a separate regulation called the Community Right to Know Law, so that any chemicals that are over thresholds, it's usually 500 pounds for everything except for petroleum products, that's 10,000 pounds, has to be submitted every year by March 1st, a list of those chemicals that are over that either 500-pound threshold or 10,000-pound threshold for, say, oil. And that has to go to the DEP, and it also has to go to your local emergency planning departments, like the fire department, the police department, and then there's also a local emergency planning coordinator that needs to go out by every March 1st. So typically for the 500 pounds, you can equate that to about 70 gallons of liquid. So if you have antifreeze and you have more than, say, 70 gallons, it's probably going to have to be reported. If you have batteries, over 30 batteries, battery has lead in there, it's that sulfuric acid we had discussed. And then if you have, say, oil, it's broken up, it's 10,000 pounds for each, 10,000 pounds for motor oil, 10,000 pounds for waste oil. So you'd need about 1,200 gallons of oil to have to list it. So, okay, so just moving along here, just real quick here for your handouts, I just wanted to, here's the handout with the different pictograms that are on there. So in the color, so hopefully everybody got that. And then just real quick, just to go over lift safety briefly before we do the fire extinguisher training. There's a bunch of tips here in terms of like lifts. The main ones to remember is that if a safety feature in the lift appears to be broken or any operable part, you should let your supervisor know. Obviously, it's a lot of suspended weight, potential weight that you have on these things. The other thing is that you should never disable a lift. I've been in several dealerships, and OSHA's been in where guys were using bungee cords so they could raise and lower the lifts while they were under the car. That should be never be done. And then there's just a couple things here. So you do want to periodically take a look at your lifts, see what kind of shape's in, make sure everything's working properly. If it's not every day, that's fine, but something to be aware of.
Before we move on, Scott, we did get one more question.
Sure.
Are there companies out there that perform the right to know survey for you?
Yes, we can do that for you if you want.
Okay, so Scott's company, Environmental Compliance Monitoring.
And that's my contact information is on the end of that first presentation. I think at the end of the second one as well. So.
And we'll give it to you again when we wrap up.
Okay, fire extinguisher training. It's kind of a catch-22 that before you can get your certificate of occupancy from the township and move into your building, the fire extinguishers need to be up. However, you're not allowed to use those until you've had this training. So this training is just going to be a real brief training. There's a quiz as well. I'll try to hit some of the quiz questions as we go through. That will allow you to use these extinguishers. It's not going to be the full-blown training a fire department person would have. It's only for very small fires, which they call, OSHA uses the word incipient. I'm not quite sure why, but they do. But we'll go over that. Again, if there's any questions as we're going through this, feel free to ask. The first slide here is the fire triangle, and the reason that that's important is that different extinguishers work different ways, and if you take out any side of this triangle, the fire is going to go out. You don't have to take out all three, just any one side. So if the fire department comes out with their water hoses, they're taking away the heat side, the fire is going to go out. If you have, I was in a dealership and body shop last week that for whatever reason they had all carbon dioxide extinguishers, that's going to replace the oxygen and make the fire go out. And then if you're the more typical dealership and also in your offices, you're probably going to have a combination dry chemical extinguisher, and you're spraying that over the bottom of the fire to cover the source of the fuel. And that's how you're taking out the bottom of the triangle with those. Okay, types of fires. And this is, there's a question in the quiz on this. Class A is just water, paper. Class B is flammable liquids, oil, gas, and grease, which is important, obviously, with a dealership. Class C is an electrical fire. Your Xerox machine catches on fire. And Class D you probably won't run into. It's combustible metals, although some people have told me there's magnesium locks in some of the higher-end cars. Any extinguisher you're going to use is going to have these letters on there, and it's going to tell you which type of fires you're going to put out. So typically, if you have those carbon dioxide extinguishers are going to put out A and B, and those combinations extinguishers are going to put out A, B, and C. So again, you're removing one of the sides of that triangle. When you're back in your dealership, you should just take a look around. There should be extinguishers probably every 75 feet or so up on your walls, and those are inspected every year for operation. And here's the most common fire extinguishers. That multi-purpose dry chemical is the most common one that you'll see. Again, last week, for whatever reason, this one dealership had all carbon dioxide extinguishers. And then once in a while, you'll still see a water extinguisher. I saw it at one dealership, a Volvo dealership. But those are kind of phased out because and I'll get into why that they're not appropriate to use in a lot of these fires. The dry chemical is good for class A, B, or C, and it looks similar to the carbon dioxide except for it doesn't have the big flanged hose, and it has a little pressure gauge on the top there. There's different sizes of these things, 15-pounders, 10-pounders. Typically, in a dealership, you'll see the 15, the bigger ones in the back of the shop in the service area. And if you go up front in the office, you'll see the 10-pounders. Here's the carbon dioxide extinguisher. Similar to the other one, no gauge, it has a flange nozzle, and you're basically replacing the oxygen. And then here's this guy. You really don't want to use this. You don't want to be spraying. It's only good for paper or wood. You don't want to be spraying water and electrical fire, obviously. And if you're in a dealership and you have an oil fire, it's going to be just like a fire at home with a grease fire. If you spray water on it, it's just going to spread the fire. So that's on the quiz. So that's why you don't want to use water in that situation. If a fire does break out, grab the extinguisher. Don't try to take a water hose that might be in the back of the service area for an oil fire. Okay, 10 to 15 pounds, types A, B, C, or BC. You might see a little number on these, on the extinguishers, that it might be a 10 or 20, and that would refer to the square footage of a 1-inch piece of plywood that you can put out. So these things are very limited. So even for somebody that had, for 20 square feet of plywood, you're talking a piece of plywood that's 4 by 5. So the size of like a picture hanging on your wall, basically. Anything bigger than that, in terms of a fire, the extinguisher's not going to do the work for you. When do you use extinguishers? Just like the chemicals, if you spill it, you sound the alarm. You want to let somebody know that there's a problem. The building has been evacuated. I guess it's a judgment call. If you have a little fire in the back of the service area and there's still somebody in the showroom, I would put out the fire. The fire is small and confined. Again, it's the word incipient. I'm not sure why they use that, but that's on the quiz. That means it's small and it hasn't moved. So, for example, I'm looking at Brian here. If his chair was on fire, he probably could put it out with the extinguisher, but if his chair is on fire and it's also moved to the desk that's on fire, the extinguisher is not going to be strong enough to put it out. So it's going to be small and confined. It hasn't moved from its point of origin. You should always have an escape path so you can get out. So if you're in a room, you want to have the door at your back. So in case when you're trying to fight the fire, it causes it to spread. Which, if you're spraying it either with the carbon dioxide or whatever, that can happen. And then the next couple here, the extinguishers match the fire type and make sure it works effectively. And then even on the following slide, you're confident that you can put the fire out. The bottom line is if there's any question, you're not confident, just evacuate the area and let the experts come in and put the fire out. So if there's any doubt in your mind that it's safe, evacuate. Okay, when shouldn't you use extinguishers? It's pretty much the reverse of what we just said. The fire is large, it's grown beyond its initial point of origin. You don't have an escape path, you're not sure if you have the right extinguisher. And I had mentioned before that chemicals in the back of a service area have gotten less and less hazardous as we move along. However, a lot of that goes out the window if it catches on fire. You have things called daughter products coming off from the fire, so you have to be aware of those fumes and smoke coming off of chemicals in the burning can be much more hazardous than the chemicals themselves, so you got to be aware of that. If you're outside, you know, fight from upwind, so you're not sitting downwind of the flames. Okay, so this is what you're supposed to take away from the training in case you do have a fire, an emergency. You have this easy word here, the acronym PASS. So hopefully that sticks in your brain. It's pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire. It's real important that you aim at the base, especially with those dry chemicals, because if you aim at the flames, it's going to shoot from one side to the other. It's not going to put the fire out. So you want to spread it like a blanket. You want to cover that whole thing with the powder to make it go out. And that's squeeze, and then the sweep. You're sweeping it side to side, trying to cover the source of what's burning. So you're putting a blanket on there. If you do put the fire out, don't go across the street and have a couple beers. Wait till the fire department comes out. Somebody should wait. Just watch to make sure that the fire doesn't relight after you put it out. All right, so there's been studies done that show that for whatever reason, housekeeping reduces the potential for a fire. So you want to keep your work area clean. You don't want to have, say, like dirty rags near chemicals that are still out or source of ignition. So you want to, it's just another chance for a fire to start. There's a lot of machine shops in central Jersey, Kenilworth Union area, where they were having fires in the middle of the night. And it was because rags they used to clean these metal parts with solvents were being thrown onto workstations, and that was basically spontaneously combusting in the middle of the night. So, just like with chemicals, there's hazards obviously associated with fires. But if you're aware of what you're supposed to do in an emergency, and you're handling the chemicals properly, you're going to minimize those hazards. So here's my contact information. If you do have any questions, feel free to contact me afterwards. Hopefully I hit most of the points on the quiz there for you. And that's it. Again, feel free to have any questions.
Well, I'm going to go over a couple of things here at the end just so everybody's aware of how this is going to work with returning the quizzes and everything. So if anybody has any questions, you can submit them while I'm going over this. We'll just wrap up in a couple of minutes here. It'll be just about a 1-hour presentation. Basically, we hope everybody today found the webinar informative and worthwhile. If you do have any additional questions, we definitely encourage you to contact Scott at the email address seh-ecm@att.net, or you can call him at 908-874-0990. That's correct?
Yes.
If you have not yet received copies, in fact, I saw that's one of the questions that just popped up. If you have not received copies of the slides or the other attachments, including the 2 quizzes, please email me. I am Brian Hughes at bhughes@njcar.org, and I'll make sure you get them right away this afternoon. Remember, in order to get credit for participating in today's webinar, you must complete and return the 2 short quizzes to Scott. Make sure that your name and your dealership's name are on the quizzes. And the completed quizzes can be faxed to Scott's attention at, here's the fax number, 908-874-0920.
Yes.
Scott will have a list of the paid registrants as of today, and will obviously compare the quizzes received to that list. We will be posting a recording of today's webinar and the various attachments in the next week or so. All registrants, including some of your coworkers who may not have attended today's webinar, will get a free code to download the materials, both the webinar and the materials, in the coming weeks. If any of your coworkers who did not yet register, but also need to complete the training, they will be able to purchase the webinar separately and complete the training at their leisure. It'll be posted up there at the same price as it would have been for this live participation.
It just needs to be done by December 1st.
Right, right. For the global harmonization standard piece of it had to be done by the 1st.
Right.
So hopefully that answers everybody's questions. We do have a couple questions here. Can you cover question 8 on the hazard quiz?
Sure.
Let's find that one.
Question number 8 on the hazard quiz. Okay, you only know the health hazards and PPE is the personal protective equipment if you read the MSDS or labels.
Okay. Why are they phasing out Class A extinguishers? I'm assuming that is what the question was.
I'm not aware of phasing out Class A extinguishers. The A is for paper or wood fires. And typically, most dealers will have the ABC extinguisher that's good for all three, which is the paper, wood, and the oils that you have in the back of the shop and electrical fires.
Okay. Okay, the fax number again for Scott. Somebody else, the fax number?
908-874-0920.
Okay, and also someone else has to repeat the email to receive the attached paperwork. My email address is B, as in Brian, HUGHES @njcar.org. Do all dealer employees need the training?
Typically only the employees that are hands-on with any chemicals. So using the chemicals typically, which would be the service techs, your prep personnel.
And someone here had asked, this is more of a technical question, if coworkers sat in, can they take the quiz and submit it too? I know some people may have grouped around one computer or a television screen and viewed this together. As long as they had registered, as I said, Scott will have a list of all the registrants. We know, I think we had 180 registrants. Not all of you are on this call, but some of you may be in the room with them. As long as they were registered ahead of time, Scott will have their name. And as I said, if for some reason they didn't register ahead of time, they will be able to purchase the webinar and the associated materials after the fact.
And it is real important. I didn't put the name, a space for the name of the dealership, but that would help too, as Brian said at the top of the quizzes, so we can sort them and know which person is for which dealership.
Okay, and most of a lot of these questions really are about the fax number, how I receive the quizzes. Again, one last time, just give me an email. Because once we close out this webinar, the questions pane goes away, so I don't have it anymore. So just send me an email at bhughes@njcar.org, or you can call me here at NJCar, 609-883-5056, extension 315, and I will I'll send it right out to you. I'll probably be doing that most of the afternoon. It looks like. So I hope that that seems to wrap it up, and if that's it. Thank you again, Scott, and thank you everybody for attending. That concludes today's webinar.
Thank you very much.